Can we take advice from non-believers? That is what we're going to talk about today on Wake Up to the Bible. I'm Daniel Kaplan. I'm here with my father, Dr. Kaplan. We're reading through the books of the law, Genesis through Deuteronomy, a little bit every day. Today we are reading Exodus 18:13 through 23, and I'll be reading from the Robert Alter translation. And it happened on the next day that Moses sat to judge the people, and the people stood over Moses from the morning till the evening. And Moses' father-in-law saw all that he was doing for the people, and he said, "What is this thing you are doing for the people? Why are you sitting alone? Why all the people are poised over you from morning until evening?" And Moses said to his father-in-law, "For the people come to me to inquire of God. When they have some matter, it comes to me, and I judge between a man and his fellow, and I make known God's statutes and his teachings." And Moses' father-in-law said to him, "The thing that you are doing is not good. You will surely wear yourself out, both you and this people that is with you, for the thing is too heavy for you. You will not be able to do it alone. Now heed my voice. I will give you counsel, and may God be with you. Be you for the people over against God, and it shall be you who will bring the matters to God. And you shall warn them concerning the statutes and the teachings, and you shall make known to them the way in which they must go, and the deed which they must do. As for you, you shall search out from all the people able, God-fearing men, truthful men, haters of bribes, and you shall put them over chiefs of thousands, chiefs of hundreds, chiefs of fifties, and chiefs of tens. And they shall judge the people at all times, and so every matter they shall bring to you, and every small matter they themselves shall judge, and it will lighten from upon you, and they will bear it with you. If you do this thing, God will charge you, and you will be able to stand, and also all this people will come to its place in peace. All right. So here we have Jethro actually making a major contribution because he sees a problem, and that gets us to our original question. And I not, and it's a little bit. The way I phrased it was a little, maybe a little bit provocative, because Jethro is not a true unbeliever, right? Because he's at least an ethical monotheist, or at least an ethical henotheist, which is at least more than nothing, right? So I do think that we should be careful if somebody is truly somebody who's trying to come in and give us ethical advice who doesn't even understand something like objective reality or things like that. However, this is somebody from outside of the community, uh, in terms of the religious perspective, right? He's a family member, but because he comes in from outside the religious community, he actually does notice a legitimate problem. And this can be an issue that religious communities have, is they get so insulated that stuff that would be apparent to somebody outside the community because they come in and they're like, well, why are you doing things this way? It doesn't make a lot of sense. They could just be like, well, you're not part of the community. You wouldn't understand. And I would say we need to be very careful about that because there's a lot of wisdom you can get from different people, just because they're not within your bubble, right? Do you have anything to say about that?
The Apostle Paul quoted from the wisdom of the Greeks. Solomon gathered proverbs from all over the place. Many of them were Egyptian. So
Right, exactly.
he utilized, evidently, Tamil love poetry for Song of Solomon.
Right. Yeah, and so I mean truth is truth, right? The way you know something is true is not necessarily its origin source, it's whether or not it's true. Because uh it even says, the demons know there is one God, right? So we it's called the genetic fallacy, the idea that because of the origin source of an idea, it makes it true or false, which of course doesn't make a lot of sense. I mean, if a horrific dictator comes up with a good way of examining a leaf and figures out something about botany, it doesn't make it false just because they're a horrific dictator, right? So we have to weigh points on their merits, is kind of what I'm getting at. I think we have to be very careful. Now, that doesn't mean we shouldn't be skeptical depending on where they come from. And I do think a bias towards people that do seem biblically minded makes a lot of sense. But this is not somebody that's coming in with the same knowledge. I mean, you look at what Moses is able to do here, right? He is talking about, making known God's statutes and his teachings. His level of understanding in terms of God's way of life is way more developed than it seems like Jethro's is. And yet, Jethro is able to give him advice that Moses would not have known otherwise. So we just have to be careful. We need to be careful that even though we can, we it's like the psalm says, we have greater understanding because we dwell in the law. That is true, but that doesn't mean we know everything, right? We can still listen to others. Um, the other thing this does point out, though, is that Moses is well aware of totality of the law well before it's given out, right? In a sense.
That's why some people think this is out of order chronologically, which I disagree.
Okay.
I think Moses was interacting with God and being guided and directed, perhaps in a way that uh, God gave him understanding, and or he may have had certain knowledge already of some of this. Even Abraham evidently had some knowledge of it.
That was what I was about to
Yeah,
say. Yeah.
right.
And Noah had to know about unclean animals, and
So,
people had to know about a sacrificial system. I mean, we don't know what was known exactly throughout, right?
right.
Just because it was preserved later doesn't mean these principles were not known and practiced before in varying ways. Because, you can see in the Bible, information gets lost all the time. It's in, well, isn't it Ezra where it's like they read the law and they're like so brokenhearted because they've
Right.
been louses all this time, right? So that's just a pattern, the fact that they have to reaffirm these moral principles doesn't imply that these moral principles were not communicated to humans until Leviticus
Well, he says also
or Exodus for
that
that
I
matter.
make known the statutes of God and his laws.
Yes,
Well, later on, they were publicly declared to everybody.
but my point is
So,
maybe they were publicly declared already,
well, not in the same form.
not not not
Yeah,
not preserved in the same form.
right.
No.
Yeah.
But was there a public? Obviously, there was a public declaration of something for Abraham to understand something.
Well, it was to Abraham, not necessarily to the
Well,
to
then how
the.
did Noah know about the unclean laws?
Well, that's a point.
And then how did Abel know to sacrifice?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
You
Okay.
know what I mean? Like
Right.
something was known publicly at some point. I mean, we know that there are public laws given to Adam and Eve because they're the only people on the earth and
And
they're
then,
given laws.
right. Yeah.
And we don't know what the extent was,
Right. Right. Yeah. Right.
because as
Right.
soon as the sin was committed, I don't think God was like, all right, have a great life. Don't you think that there would have been, okay, now that now that the consequences of trying to decide your own morality was such, let me actually tell you what morality is.
Okay.
I mean, it just seems it doesn't really hold true to me. It doesn't make sense, especially too depending on how rigid you want to get about your interpretation of certain verses. Like, Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow, right? Well, Jesus
Okay.
Christ is the representative of the interaction between mankind and God. Shouldn't that be constant? And
Well,
shouldn't the just as he came in the first century or whatever, came then in order to tell us the right moral way to believe, and just be and in the same way that he came here to give them, why would that be something that didn't start until now? That's my point.
all right.
you know, and I can't get too rigid about what that was, but I can't think that you were just sent out. I mean, it was thousands of years. I can't imagine people were just hung out to dry without anything.
Well, evidently, Enoch was preaching,
Yeah,
and
Enoch walked with God, so
yeah,
what does that mean?
and
He would have
Noah.
had to have been aware, and is he just
Right.
going to keep that to himself?
Well, no, because
Whatever knowledge he had
no,
was passed on to somebody.
evidently, he got himself in trouble, had to be rescued.
Right.
Okay.
So, and that would imply that he was living in a way that made other people
Right.
uncomfortable,
Yeah.
because otherwise why would they care?
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
So I mean, I just feel like there's more of a constant going on here. And I know people get bent out of shape over, well, what do you mean with the oral Torah and stuff like that? And yes, I can't get too dogmatic as to what it was, but something was going on, right?
Some of you who see this at some point will have memories of when thousands of people would come to Northeast Texas and camp out during the Festival of Tabernacles. And during those years, we did follow the principle of having what we called captains of thousands, captains of hundreds,
Yeah.
captains of fifties, captains of tens. We did organize the campground according to this principle.
Well, it's interesting that again, this is something that would rub noses with people nowadays, or whatever you want to say, or rub against them. Is immediately you have a hierarchy, right? And you have a certain idea of in order to kind of it's a resource thing, right? If you have a resource that is a major scholar and they can really get down into the muck of some really complicated, nuanced thing, that's an intense thing to concern yourself with, and it doesn't it's a waste of their resource to ask them a question that is basic that other people can answer, right? It's like what you do in a business. You kind of go up the chain and like customer relations, right? If your issue is, well, my device is broken and they have a company policy that's like, oh, well, when somebody says that, you just send them a replacement, you don't have to keep going, right? But eventually you'll get up the chain and you'll reach some sort of big shot who's like the whatever the general manager of that, because they have to make some sort of weird exceptional decision. And that's the point, is that Moses should have been dealing with the weird nuanced points, which also goes to show that the law is not written without the concept of nuance, right? We cannot be as dogmatic in the way that some people get. There's wiggle room within it on purpose, because it is meant to be made for the on average situation, but it is not so rigidly, and that would just be foolish to not allow for the exception, right? But the exception does not get rid of the rule. The rule still exists, but you need these wise people in order to figure out these exceptions, because if you don't, what will happen is the exceptions will just dissolve the rule, right? And that's why you need people that can parse it out and get into that nuance and figure out how to deal with it in a proper way.
A wise leader knows how to delegate. This is
Yes.
an important principle here of leadership, the delegation of responsibility.
Now, it is an interesting question. Sean was asking it, is that here you have small matters they will judge, and greater matters, and like how do you know that, right? And that's always a challenging thing when it comes to parsing out the law, right? What does it mean? What does it mean when Jesus says, the least of the commandments and things like that? Um, how do you know? I would say, in terms of this sort of stuff, uh, my gut instinct, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, when I think of the difference between a small matter and a great matter, I'm thinking of the impact to everybody else. Also, the complicated nature of the question. So, if it's a simple question that has a pretty straightforward answer and the implications on the society are not that big, then somebody at a lower level can answer it. But the bigger the implications to society are, or the more complicated the question, the more it has to go up. What do you say?
And I would say too, if you appoint the proper kind of judges, if something is a very difficult matter, they'll have a sense of going higher with it, carrying, taking it up to the next level. They should be honest enough about their own ability
Right.
and the nature of the question, that if they don't feel confident that they can handle it, that they can send it up the line.
And
That
that's very important
right.
as people get more diligent about stuff, which is something that I've talked about before, right? The moment you get diligent on a principle, great. Give yourself a pat on the back. That is not the time that you're necessarily going to be able to help somebody else get diligent on the principle, because you haven't acted it out. So you haven't gone through it and figured out. It especially happens, I know some people who get more diligent about the Sabbath, right? They live their life and then one day they're like, I need to really take this more seriously, and they can start dictating to others, and they haven't lived with it for a very long time. And so when you get into some of these nuanced situations, ox in a ditch sort of situations, what is an ox in a ditch situation, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, but well, probably much later, but when you get into stuff like that, you can give bad advice because you have not lived with it, and you can get very rigid. So you have to be careful. So
There's
yeah, you should essentially follow this principle and move it up to a scholar or somebody who's done it longer, in my
there
opinion.
there doesn't seem to be a formal appeal process here, but except just from the judges themselves. But I do believe that there's an implication of the right of appeal when you see people coming to King Solomon, for example, for a
Right.
decision. Evidently, they felt that that they wanted to hear from the king.
Mhm.
This because the matter was so important. So even though there's not a direct statement, a formal appeal process, it seems that there somehow as custom it's there.
Yeah. Yeah, Robert Alter specifically says for hard matters, he says he does not want, he thinks with the way the language is written, we should not think of great as important in like large issues of wealth. It's more of the difficult to resolve cases,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
Which I think is true. I do think impact on society also should factor, but I think it's also like my dad said, you should be honest if you're like, well, I could just give a kind of an easy, sort of flippant response, but maybe I actually should think about this a little. Maybe this is a little bit more complicated than I'm making it out, and let's kind of move it up to a more astute person or somebody who's
Right.
lived in the lifestyle longer or whatever it is.
Right.
I mean, some people just are more talented in that way, right? We
Right.
have legal type minds, and they are
Right.
more talented at looking at it because, like I said, the important thing about a legal type mind like that is the ability to see nuance, but it's also the ability to care enough about the law that you're not trying to disintegrate the law
Right.
through exception.
Right.
And you need both. Now, one thing you don't need, which is a little bit challenging according to this, is what he when he says what you need. Let's go back. He says God-fearing men, okay, truthful men, haters of bribes. What he does not say is emotional intelligence. He does not, because, or specifically, compassion is not mentioned. Now, I'm not saying a God fearing person is going to care about their fellow man, but the reason why I don't think he says that is because of what it eventually will say in Leviticus is that can pervert justice. If you start to look at somebody's financial situation, for example, you can be like, well, the poor person, don't they really need a leg up? Maybe I can kind of be new. And that's not the point. The point is you need people that are actually, for lack of, a little bit hard, a little bit maybe, I wouldn't say emotionally disconnected, but are willing to be kind of objectively above that. And that's really what you want. If you think about truly who you would want as a good, judge, you would not want somebody that's that ruled by that. You want somebody that's going to follow the guidelines well, because you could be like, well, I want them to show compassion for me. Fair enough, but do you want them to show compassion for the other person and unfairly do just rob you of justice? Uh, you wouldn't. So it's challenging, but I think that's why it's not mentioned.
I can't help but comment. I don't know when you're gonna see this,
Uh-oh,
but we right
you're
now
getting topical.
right now we're going through a process where a new Supreme Court justice will be chosen. So it
Right.
just kind of hit me some of your comments, but that's as far as I'm going to go.
No, and I
Take
understand that. But again, if you think about the type of person that people would want,
they would want
you
some
almost want somebody that is
right,
apathetic, almost like in a sense, versus
right,
overly concerned with the feelings of the people.
right. Yeah, okay, yeah, fair enough.
That's my point.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
And again, I'm not saying that God fearing does involve loving your
of
neighbor.
course.
But the
Yeah,
reason why I don't think it's mentioned explicitly in that way is because Jethro is trying to get to the point of you don't want people that are going to pervert justice because of that. That's
by
what
the
I'm
way,
getting.
what one thing that occurred to me just now, Moses got the daughter of a really sharp man.
He did.
Yeah,
But Moses was sharp himself. If you
right.
follow my, if you follow
No,
my,
right.
if you
Yeah,
follow my belief of what
right,
humble means, which is a very
right,
strong sense of reality,
right.
it
Yeah,
makes sense that he would be attracted to somebody who also has a very strong
right,
sense of
right,
reality, who came from a father who has a strong sense
right,
of
right.
reality.
There you go. Okay.
And also, this would be why Moses was so able to take the advice, because he was not concerned with position or
Right,
authority or the genetic fallacy. He was merely concerned with, does that ring true? Yes, he made a good point, and I will follow it.
right.
So there we go. All right. Anything else you want to talk about?
Let's move on.
Let's move on. We are already at the Mount Sinai, basically. So let's move on to Mount Sinai a little bit more. And please like, subscribe, hit the bell, and we'll be reading the law this year.